This is our first of 2 meetings this week on the consolidated plan. The city's consolidated plan is a document that we are required to produce by the federal government, which sets out our funding priorities for the coming 5 years. We are currently in the preliminary stages of drafting the city's 2025 to 2029 consolidated plan. The heart of the consolidated plan is the strategic plan, a table of over 50 types of public services and goods that we produce with federal funds: affordable housing, workforce development and job training programs, childcare, food assistance. And the consolidated plan and the strategic plan set forth how many of each we want to produce over the coming 5 years from 2025 to 2029. The city receives about $25 million in HUD formula funds each year: CDBG, Home, ESG, HOPWA, which are governed through this consolidated planning process. So thank you again for joining us. Today on our agenda, we'll be hearing first from LISC and then from the Reinvestment Fund. These are 2 consultants that CDA has brought on board to help steer us through the consolidated planning process, and they'll be providing some updates regarding the needs analysis and community input to date. Again, we're in the preliminary stages, so right now we're looking at the data, listening to the public, but before anything is submitted to HUD, we will be releasing a draft for public comment and keeping that draft available for public comment for over 30 days. After LISC and the Reinvestment Fund present, our advisory committee members who are here and were randomly selected from folks who applied to serve on it, and also members of the public, will have an opportunity to ask questions or make comments. And then after that, we're going to do just a little bit of planning for tomorrow's town hall and additional community engagement activities, including focus groups. Tomorrow's town hall is really our opportunity to listen to the community. In this meeting, we and our consultants are going to do a lot of talking about the process thus far, and so you'll get a lot of information. But the purpose of the town hall tomorrow at the Wohl Center is really to listen to the public. We're going to be doing mapping exercises. What are community assets, areas that are more challenging in your neighborhoods? We're going to do budgeting exercises. How would you allocate these 20 coins, these 20 million across affordable housing, early childcare, food, etc.? We're going to be asking what's missing. What does affordable housing mean to you? What are your highest funding priorities? These are the types of questions and the type of input that we need from the public that will go into framing the consolidated plan. We're still happy to hear that input today, but again, the primary purpose of today's meeting is to provide an update from our consultants on our consolidated planning process. They're really our subject matter experts that we're lucky to have on board, and so it's also an opportunity to ask them questions. So with that, without further ado, I'm actually going to ask folks to go through a round of introductions. We're not that many people here in this room, so I think it's a good idea to just quickly go around, share name, whatever other information you like, and after we go around inside the room, we'll toss it to our partners who are joining us virtually. So my name is Noel Pfeffer. I lead the city's Community Development Administration.
My name is Kaveh Razani, the co-director of St. Louis Art Place Initiative and business owner and commercial property developer on Cherokee Street.
I'm Tom Radomski, resident of Old North, and I'm a citizen member of the committee.
I'm just talking to
Dr. Tanil Rose Martin. I'm the Special Assistant for Development for CDA.
Greer. I'm on the advisory committee.
I'm Karen McKinley. I'm on the committee. I'm a 6th Ward resident and a project manager.
Great.
Hello, my name is Matt.
I'm Eric Wood, and I'm a resident of downtown.
Who's Dr. Francis? My name is Jude. Students of WashU.
My name is Mitch.
Karen Hutchins, Project Manager with CDA.
ConPlan Citizen.
Wonderful. Thank you all for joining us. I'll toss it now to our guests attending virtually. Tia, do you want to kick us off?
Here at all anymore. Did you ask us to introduce ourselves? Is that what I think I heard
Yes, go ahead, Tia.
there? Hi, I'm Tia Braseth. I'm with LISC.
I'm Chris Plummer. I'm with LISC.
I'm Ira Goldstein with Reinvestment Fund.
I'm Michelle Schmidt with Reinvestment Fund.
I'm Marcy Monaco Vavrick, also with Reinvestment Fund.
Great. Well, again, thank you for joining us. And I think I'm going to toss to Tia now to lead off the presentation. And feel free to share any slides you have. And we'll be able to see them here in the room.
Okay. Do you want to open that one that we sent to you, or did you want us to open it on our end?
Yeah, if you can open it on your end.
Okay. Give me one moment. See that all right?
Yes, that looks great. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. About that. Okay, as you heard, I'm Tia Braseth. I'm with LISC. I met most of you, if not all of you, early on in this process. It was at one of the initial meetings that you had as a Citizen Advisory Committee. And I'm back again, and I just want to give you an update of the process that we're in. So as you know, LISC is writing your consolidated plan. We're working with two other consultants, sub-consultants on this project. Chris, who is on the phone call, and Civitas, who are writing a bulk of the consolidated plan. And as far as updates, the needs assessment and market analysis sections that we are doing are nearly complete. I'd say they're about 90% complete, with most of the data collected for the analysis of impediments. That does come at a later date, but we have collected most of that information as well. And we are currently in the consultation and community engagement process, as you are aware, with tomorrow being the town hall and next week being focus groups. And we will also begin conducting phone interviews with a stakeholders list provided by the CDA. And we expect to complete those interviews in about 2.5 weeks to incorporate their feedback into the consolidated plan. And a completed draft for comment will be done at the end of this month. And I have a timeline here. Oh, maybe I don't have the timeline anymore. Oh, here it is. So this is about where we're at with the timeline for next steps. You can see in August, we will have that final copy completed after staff has reviewed it. And we have reviewed it. It will then go out for public comment in September and be submitted to HUD by November 15th. And for now, I would like to just kind of spend most of our time focusing on where we're at in the needs assessment and the survey results as of today. I believe we have 267 people that have responded to the survey, and there's more and more that are getting added to that number each day. So with that, I would pass this off to Chris. Chris, I can leave this presentation up if you just want to present from it, but I'll move back.
Okay. If you can go back in the process. Okay.
Good, sir?
think the previous slide. Okay.
Oh, yeah,
Maybe
there
the
we go.
back one, right, okay. Yeah, so, good evening, everyone, and, I'm Chris Plummer with ASK Development Solutions, and I have been doing this work since 1989, and, I have done quite a lot of these, and I want to just commend you as a municipal grantee that this is one of the most robust processes I've been involved in, and I really want to commend you because you will get a lot of input that will drive your prioritization and making decisions about how you allocate funding over the entire 5 years and on the annual basis. As you know, even with the amount of money that you're receiving comparatively, those funds are not going to fill every need. So it's important to prioritize. So we were contracted to develop the consolidated plan in the following areas: the needs assessment, ensuring that there's community participation through surveys, focus groups, consultations, and so on. The plan has a housing market analysis section, which is being led by the reinvestment fund. When we get the information, that is going to be put into a section of the plan in the online system that HUD has for this. And then a part of this plan is that the city is required to provide certifications, various certifications. One of them is that HUD is required to certify that the city has to certify to HUD that it will affirmatively further fair housing. And that involves doing what is called an analysis of impediments to fair housing choice, where you identify impediments to fair housing based on the Fair Housing Act. And that includes community input, speaking to stakeholders, and getting a sense of what is preventing persons to access affordable quality housing. And that's a part of the plan. So once we get all of that demographic housing data and get all of that community input, it's going to help you to identify and prioritize your needs, which would then be translated into goals and objectives and over a 5-year period, which will drive the 5-year plan is really an estimate of funding that you receive for the 5 years. And then each year you will be allocated funding. And you will then use that plan to determine how you allocate those dollars. Next slide, please. So Tia mentioned where we are in the process. These are the main components of the consolidated plan. And with this plan, you also add in the first year annual action plan, where HUD will tell you how much money you're actually going to get. And then you will be identifying those expected resources, identifying any other resources that you leverage, developing annual goals and objectives based on the consolidated plan, looking at affordable housing issues and addressing program-specific requirements. And then you would include, so those are the main components of the plan. Next slide. So we wanted to, next slide. Yeah, we already did the next step. Okay. So we wanted to just touch on a few key takeaways that we have identified so far. The big buckets of housing, economic development, public improvement, public facilities, public services. We asked respondents to rank them in terms of what they felt was the order of highest importance. And you can see here how affordable housing was number one. Interestingly, that revitalization of vacant properties came as number two. That in my experience has not been typical, but this is what it is in your community. We then took each of those individual areas and identified the type of activities within those areas and what people saw as the highest priority. For affordable housing, it was rental, preservation of existing home ownership units, rental assistance, and interestingly, energy efficiency was identified as a preference, and rent-to-own housing was also identified as a preference there. Then the next area broke out in terms of community revitalization, trying to improve vacant lots, trying to improve the neighborhoods in which people live, code enforcement, making sure that there's not slum and blight, addressing it on an area-wide basis or individually. And then for economic development, we noted that what was important to people was workforce development, job creation, and small business assistance. Next slide. Okay, so then we look with the next area was public infrastructure improvements and also public facilities, and what people identified as highest priority: street improvements, sidewalks, water sewer improvements, health centers was viewed then, and then neighborhood improvement, cleanup activities, and so on. The next bucket we had was public services, and for the most part, there's usually a heavy need in that area. So people really identified most of the activity as a high need activities, but in terms of the main ones given the highest priority had to do with mental health for both adults and children. They were separated, and they both had high scores in terms of the needs for public service, homeless prevention, healthcare. You can see these were not all of the public service activities, but those that persons viewed as having the highest priorities. And so all of these priorities will help the city in being able to identify how the funds will be allocated. Just a note here, and you might know this already, that there are some limitations in terms of how much money can be allocated to public service. HUD limits only 15% can be used for public service unless you are using funds within what is called a neighborhood revitalization strategy areas, some of the ones you have. In that case, the 15% cap is waived. Next. So from the demographic and housing data we looked at, we noted the increase in median home value, increase in rent. We noticed the fact that many households were cost burden, which means that they're paying more than 30% of their income on housing expense. And another group were severely cost burdened, spending more than 50% of income on housing. This data, you can see the data sources, and we broke this out in terms of rental households. And we noted, as you can note here, more renter households are cost burdened and home ownership households. And then we looked at the fact that you have a high number of households in the 0 to 30% of the area median income, family income data, and this has an impact on how you're able to serve the needs of that family, those families, because that speaks to a greater need for financial subsidies for them, even in terms of home ownership, because they may not qualify for high enough mortgages. And then we looked at certain housing factors that folks identified as being most impactful on their lived experience: rents, home prices, property taxes, and so on. Interestingly, folks felt their increase in absentee landlords was something that impacted them. Next slide. And so with the analysis of impediments, where we have started doing some of the data on that, we noted that fair housing complaints between 2018 and 2023 decreased significantly, especially between 2021 and 2023. We're still trying to determine some of the factors that may contribute to that. And then here are some of the key takeaways from the fair housing takeaways from the survey, that only 12% report being denied housing based on the protected classes under the Fair Housing Act. And for those who reported, 53% stated race as a discrimination factor. But it was also interesting that for those who reported, 67% preferred not to answer where reported and the result. And as you can see, when regarding facing barriers, 79% selected none or not applicable as them facing barriers to quality, safe, and affordable housing. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And then only 30% of the respondents consider housing discrimination as a significant issue. And, 46 saw it as limited. Next slide. I think that, yeah. So this information, as mentioned before, is going to help us in the strategic planning process, which is going to come up next, where we'll use this data to prioritize needs and to identify goals and objectives. Let me stop at this point. I think I hand over to the reinvestment fund. Yeah.
I have a quick question. Can you hear me, Chris?
Yes, barely though.
I think that it would be helpful for the advisory committee if you all could maybe put the raw numbers, because the number of respondents that answered those questions is particularly low compared to the overall number of respondents that started the survey. So I think just for the committee, for them to have a better understanding, because they're looking perplexed.
I didn't hear any of that. I don't know if you did, Chris.
No, it's very low.
Hi, can you all hear me?
I think mine's working too.
Slightly.
The request was if you could share the raw numbers for the survey responses with the committee.
Yeah, just like a raw data report, like the generated right from the pool.
I can repeat your. I think the consideration was just curiosity around the low number of respondents to those questions about barriers to housing insecurity.
Oh,
yeah. Barriers to fair housing, excuse me.
Do you want to pull that?
Was that right?
Yes,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have to be, they can get that to us.
Okay.
Oh, okay, if I can, yeah, we'll get it to you, yeah.
Thank you all very much. Let's hold additional questions until after the reinvestment fund, but if you could provide that as a follow-up, that'll be great.
Yes, we'll do that.
All right, over to you, the reinvestment fund. I don't know if that's Ira or Michelle or Marcy or all of you.
Okay, just checking to make sure that people can see my screen. Hang on, I'm going to turn it into a
Yes, we can.
slideshow in one
Yes.
second. Full screen. Okay, great. So my name's Ira Goldstein, and I'm going to be speaking this evening on behalf of the study team for this particular project, which includes Michelle Schmidt and Marcy Monaco Vavrick. Just by background, Reinvestment Fund is a Philadelphia-based CDFI community development financial institution like LISC, and like LISC, in many ways, we like to describe ourselves basically as a lending institution with a public purpose. In addition, we have this policy solutions group of which Michelle and I are part, and Marcy are part, and we do these kinds of housing market analyses, among other things, which are really designed as a set of tools that communities and investors and alike can use to be able to sort of understand where the intervention strategies and investments that they're contemplating, where they're going to have the greatest possible effect. Our particular approach to a lot of this is statistical and spatial, geographic. You'll see a lot of maps as we go through this process. But there's also a strong qualitative component, which means that we will spend an awful lot of time in the field in St. Louis. In fact, we will be there this week, field validating both the data and the analytics that we derive from them. So the market value analysis, this is going to be, I think, the third one that we're now doing in St. Louis. It is a tool that we designed in Philadelphia back in calendar year 2000 that was basically the database underpinnings for a near $300 million worth of investments into Philadelphia's neighborhoods, a program that was started by then Mayor John Street. It is, as I said, it's very data-based, it's field validated, it's validated with experts like yourselves, and we will meet with you a few times throughout this process to look at both the underlying data as well as the analytics that get derived to make sure that what we've created is something that is consistent with your perspective of the on-the-ground reality, and where it isn't, why, and where it is, terrific. This is an analysis that we've done in probably 40 or so different cities around the country, ranging in size from, I think Selma, Alabama is probably the smallest within, I guess at the time it probably had about 19,000 people. And we've, I guess the largest place we did it, at least population-wise, was Houston, Texas. Many of the cities that we work, we come back about every 3 or 4 years, like the city of St. Louis, and redo the analysis, which gives the local communities and stakeholders an opportunity to see how their communities have changed and where they're really sort of tracking investments like those that perhaps will flow from the ConPlan, an ability to see how markets have changed where you've made those investments. We do have a particular approach to this market analysis that we like to be very transparent about. One is, this is part of your ConPlan process, and that consolidated plan is bringing tens of millions of dollars worth of public subsidy into the city of St. Louis. At the same time, as much money as that is, it is our experience that public subsidy alone cannot create a vital market, and so that public subsidy really needs to be used in a strategic way that allows for bringing forth other investment, both other public, perhaps, as well as private and philanthropic. You're going to see, as you saw a few times before, a mapping of the city of St. Louis's neighborhoods and block groups within those neighborhoods, ranging from pretty vital, healthy, high-end real estate markets to those that manifest some serious challenges. Our philosophy in creating those different categories is really about this underlying perspective of building from strength. So It's not a matter of taking a look at that map and saying, well, these areas we're just not going to do anything. It's a matter of saying these areas have these particular characteristics and they have a variety of strengths. And this is how we're going to route our investment so that it has an impact greater than the mere dollars that are going in. We also do this for an entire city. So some people, particularly in the real estate field, are very used to looking at things like site plans and, studies that are done to figure out whether or not a particular development is possible and viable from an economic standpoint. Our notion is you do this thing across an entire city because all the customers, all the residents of the city of St. Louis are going to be customers in one way or another for the goods and services and programs and investments that you all are going to make. Lastly, we think, and believe this is a place where St. Louis stands out over the years, is that the best decisions made in terms of the community investment field are done based on sound and objective analyses of market data. The MVA is used a variety of different ways in a number of different places around the country. It's used to create acquisition and disposition strategies for land banks. In the city of Detroit, it was used to establish a capital budget. In the state of Delaware, it's been used to figure out how to provide incentive points for developments in certain kinds of market areas. In the city of St. Louis, it's been used a variety of different ways in terms of understanding development opportunities in support of comprehensive plans and assessments of fair housing. And in a number of cities, it's been used even to sort of think about identifying where these, what we'll call sort of tipping point projects could be. So where in space could an investment be made and have an impact that is greater than the specific locus of that investment? The process involves gathering a lot of data, administrative data. So that's data that the city itself is creating about its various activities. We take and geocode that, which means we take all of those individual records and we're able to sort of very specifically place them in space on the ground and then ultimately map them. We inspect those data, we subject them to a variety of sort of logical and validity checks, and we do everything we can to ensure, including displaying them to folks like you throughout this process to make sure that those underlying data are correct, because you can't have a sound model that's based on unsound data going into it. So we take a lot of time and effort to make sure that those data are accurate going in. We use a statistical cluster analysis, which takes all the block groups in the city of St. Louis. It attaches to them their various characteristics of the administrative data that we measure, and then we statistically sort them out into groups, wherein all the block groups in a group are pretty similar across all those dimensions, but those groups are very different. We then will revalidate that to make sure, both with you and on our in the field, we will be validating that, and ultimately then we will sort of lock those data down once we're sure that it's correct, and then move forward with a variety of other kinds of things that will go on top of it. I just want to give you a sense of just how carefully we validate these data. This particular map of St. Louis has a variety of different color tracks on that. That track that you're seeing on there represents the result of a GPS little dongle that we attach to our car and we attach to our laptops as we're going around the city of St. Louis. And we're going up and down the streets. Every single one of those blue and green and tan and other colors on that thing, that's where we go. We get to all parts of the city of St. Louis. And we will get to all parts of the city of St. Louis again. So I don't have new data to show you. Just as a bit of a refresher, I do have the prior MVA, and we are at this point at a place where we think we have most of the data gathered, courtesy of a lot of folks at that Ptolemy group that you all are working with. We're able to provide us a lot. We got some on our own, but we feel like we're really pretty close to having everything, and a big debt of gratitude to my colleagues, Marcy and Michelle, for making sure as all that data came in that it was being cleaned and geocoded, all the things that it needs to be done. So This particular chart is showing you what goes into an MVA. And you'll, from there, you can see that we create this out of home sale prices. We create it out of the variability of those prices, home ownership rate, permitting activity, distressed sales, investor sales. We do vacant land and vacant buildings. We look at renters who have received a public subsidy to support their rent, and we look at the degree to which geography of block groups area is non-residential. One of the things you'll notice is we sort them into, in this instance, categories labeled A through I. NR represented places where there was insufficient data to make a coding, but it's a relatively small number of block groups out of all of St. Louis's block groups. And you'll see we sort of rank order these by price, but that's almost where that kind of breaks off. For example, although from a public policy perspective, oftentimes people think about home ownership neighborhoods as the strongest possible neighborhoods. What you observe in the city of St. Louis is some of your strongest neighborhoods from a market perspective are places that have below average home ownership rates. In fact, in some instances, double-digit points below home ownership. We see a lot of distressed sales in some of the more distressed markets. We see a lot of investor sales actually in those kind of middle market areas, vacant buildings in some of the more distressed places, as well as vacant land. And so this is about not sort of forcing categories into some preordained notion of what ought to go together. It's about using the data to allow the characteristics of the market to reveal itself. And this is the map of St. Louis. Each of those characteristics that I mentioned goes into creating the color schemes that you see on this map. Obviously, and you all know St. Louis better than I, and certainly more contemporarily than I do. At least back in 2019, that northern portion of St. Louis was the place where we saw the greatest concentration of the markets that were manifesting the greatest measures of distress. Outside of that, there were some parts towards the in and around the park, and then down in the southwest portion of St. Louis that were otherwise reasonably strong markets. One of the things that I'd like to have you take out of this is to sort of go back to something I said earlier about that build from strength notion. Sometimes build from strength is approximate real estate market that is stronger than another, and how do you create linkages between stronger places and places with more challenges? And so I think you should be able to see my cursor. You're seeing here a small area that has some of the H markets, which manifest a lot of market stressors, but you're also seeing some pretty solid F markets and even some A and B markets. And so those strong markets can be used in some sense to sort of bolster and to sort of give draft to the investments that perhaps you would make in those H markets. I'm almost done. So I'd like to move quickly. One of the things that we will do is to identify the places that changed the most and in what direction since the 2019 MVA. Here's what we saw in that 2012 to 2019 time period. I noticed that the folks from LISC, importantly, are doing some analysis of housing affordability. One of the things we like to do with this MVA work is to sort of try and create an overlay which says, essentially, if I make a certain amount of money, where can I afford to go? So this is a mapping of the MVA, and we X out those areas where people who are making under $99,000 a year at that time were unable to go. Otherwise, if you made $99,000 a year, which was about 200% of the city's median, you could go almost anywhere. But as we move to 120, which is about $60,000 at that time, a big chunk of the city falls out of an option for you, as does 100% even more, 80% even more, and 50% even more. And what it turns out is if you're earning at that time about $25,000 a year, really the only places that were available to you were some of these more stressed real estate markets, principally, although not exclusively in St. Louis. If St. Louis follows the trend that we've seen in other cities, particularly in the last couple years, this amount of affordability is likely to look like a lot to you. By that, I mean what we've seen over time, and our colleagues from LISC pointed that out a little bit with some of the data that they gave you about prices and incomes and rents and such, is that those costs of housing have risen faster than people's incomes. And so at different levels, you will see more constrained affordability. Almost at the end, we also have another measure that we like to use. It's called our displacement risk ratio, and it's a really nice shorthand way of identifying places that are changing in a way that over the course of time, they are becoming unavailable to the residents of those places, to new residents who are economically like those residents, or even those residents themselves. Some people like to call it a gentrification measure. I just really like to talk about it as a measure that manifests the risks of economic displacement. And one of the things that you'll see from us when we get to the end is some coalescence of that MVA and that displacement risk ratio. Some of the really challenging places that you have to worry about are these like deep teal areas that were at that time middle market areas, but were under lots of pressure. And that means that some of them likely are no longer middle market areas, and they are no longer available to those sort of middle-ish income families that lived in them before. But we will do a complete update to this and be able to show you how that's changing. A couple other little things that one portion of this project will also have us looking at an analysis of the commercial corridors throughout the city of St. Louis. And we're going to try and support the city and LISC in an effort to identify where there are shortages and surpluses of housing, just sort of the raw housing that stock that would be needed by the residents of the city of St. Louis. And with that, let me stop, and I'll stop sharing my screen so I could see people. Hopefully all that was understandable to you, and I guess we have a couple minutes for questions.
Thank you so much, Ira, for that extremely thorough and compelling presentation. I know and I imagine a lot of people in this room were really struck by the X'd out parts of the city, and also appreciate the displacement analysis and excited to see the next steps. With that, we'll open it up to questions. Eric, go ahead.
So the data that was shown since pre-COVID, so I'm wondering if you could give us of the impact of COVID, at least in terms of your initial.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the question. Could somebody repeat that question
repeat
for us?
it.
Thank you.
I can repeat it. The question from Eric was, it looks like at least some, if not most of the data analyzed was pre-COVID. And how does COVID impact the market value analysis?
So this time around, we are going to pick up where we left off and give you the entire string up through, I guess, shake of the head, Marcy and Michelle, through complete 2023 or even partial 2024. Is that right? So we will be able to take you all the way through that COVID period, assuming you're of the mindset that it's over. So, and generally, what we've observed is in other cities that it has been, and I don't know if it's sort of because of COVID or concomitant with COVID, you saw a really a dramatic increase in home sale prices and a dramatic increase in rents. I think part of it is that stock wasn't getting created. I think it was also partly that that there is this sort of difficult cycle of rising wages and rising good prices and what the implications are for home prices. So I expect for the gentleman who asked the question that it's not going to it's not going to affect the doing of the MVA, but it will affect, I think, probably our ability to discern some inflection points in those affordability periods. And maybe to that question, maybe what we ought to try and do is with the DRR and with that affordability piece, maybe sort of break it up into, 2021, 22, 23 to the extent that we can do it and show you a couple periods that sort of bracket that COVID period. But that's a really thoughtful and important question. I appreciate that.
Great.
So when do we think that will be available?
The follow-up question there was when you think that kind of next layer of analysis might be available.
As we wrap up once we get a clean MVA, we're going to sort of lock it down. And then we will do those other analyses actually reasonably quickly. There is a certain amount of routine to us doing them. Once we sort of figure out what some of the features are, the doing of them is actually reasonably quick. So I forget exactly the timeline for the MVA, but what I would say is those other analyses will follow on pretty quickly after we lock that down.
And to clarify, sorry, do you include that COVID analysis among those other analyses, or is it part of the MBA?
We'll do that. What we'll do is we will, with the DRR and those affordability maps, what we'll do is to the extent that the data allow that, we will sort of do that as part of the MVA along with the presentation, the final presentation of it. Yes.
Great, thanks. We have another, go ahead. Well, yeah, let's give others an opportunity.
I got a question. With the MVA, how much consideration is being taken when we're talking about the equity investments going in the North City communities? A lot of the funding is still going into the bigger pots, whereas you have a lot of smaller communities or blocks that are trying to rebuild their community or revitalize it, but they don't have the opportunity to do it because the funds are keep going into the same pots year after year. So you're still neglecting certain communities that don't have the value of other communities. So how can we get that to where we can start rebuilding the communities that have been heavily neglected?
Yeah.
I don't know how much of that you caught, Ira. I'm going to take a first stab at it and then toss it to you for any additional thoughts. But my primary reaction is that the market value analysis is descriptive, right? It is going to describe the conditions as they exist today. And I think what we've just seen is that it shows extraordinary disparities, right? That descriptive proof and evidence of these disparities, not that we need it. We have a whole slew of a tapestry of equity-based analyses that show us that St. Louis is a pretty segregated city by any count. But this descriptive analysis then can feed into our strategic plan, into our consolidated plan, where equity will be a core piece of it in terms of how we invest our limited resources to drive equity. So my answer would be, and Ira, I would love your perspective for how the equity interacts with market value analysis, but my answer at least would be that the market value analysis demonstrates and shows us those inequities, and then our responsibility from a consolidated planning perspective is to address those inequities. Ira?
Yeah, I think that's sort of a great answer. I have a couple of points that I would, add to that. Firstly, one of the, I think, important features of the MVA is that we do that at what's known as a census block group level. Census block groups are not geographies that folks are used to dealing with. They're more used to dealing with census tracts. But we like the block groups because they show much greater refinement geographically, so that if you were thinking about taking a long stroll down Martin Luther King Boulevard, you would see a lot of different conditions along the way. Census tracts would kind of average those conditions together, but the block groups really sort of show you that mosaic, which is almost block by block, the differences that you see. So in terms of making those investments, to have that data at the really refined level allows you, I think, to have a real sort of constructive discussion about how best to target those investments, firstly. Secondly, I noticed from Mr. Plummer's presentation that you all are going to be doing an assessment of fair housing or an analysis of impediments or whatever HUD calls it in this current iteration. One of the things that we found is it's very useful to be able to take the MVA and use it as one of the ways to sort of disentangle some of the disparities that you see so that you can understand the degree to which disparities that manifest one way or another are driven by economics, are driven by race or ethnicity, or are driven by both. And it becomes a really kind of parsimonious way to have a nice, clean set of ways to differentiate places based on the underlying characteristics of the market. So when you see a difference that attaches across markets, you're much better able to say, for example, that yes, this is really, we've controlled for a lot of different things. And this is something that manifests as a racial equity issue versus one that's an economic equity issue, which, by the way, are two important things, but they're different things and require different kinds of approaches. So those would be the only things I would add. I do think that at the end of the day, it's going to be, about what the city and the stakeholders and the like choose to do. But this tool with that really refined geography will help you make very fine-tuned decisions on that score.
Thank you.
Ira, I had a question regarding if you look at the MVAs and you see like the higher ranking median values and then the lower ranking median values, you made the comment that you can sometimes see where the higher ranking values border against lower ranking values and that you could sometimes get an uptick for those. I wanted to understand where have you seen that and how has that come to bear? So where have you seen that happen in other cities where bordering lower value neighborhoods have received an uptick and how did they do that?
Well, I can tell you that was one of the really critical strategies of the first, that $300 million neighborhood transformation initiative program in the city of Philadelphia. We had instances where literally you could sort of walk across the street and find yourself feeling like you were in two different places altogether. And one of the strategies of the mayor back then and his planning and housing folks was to essentially create a set of investments that were designed to smooth that transition so that, as you sort of traversed from one side or the other, you sort of felt like there was some continuity of the quality of the public spaces. There was some continuity of the lighting. There was some continuity of a variety of other things so that you didn't sort of feel like these neighborhoods were dramatically different. To me, that represented a really, I think, a really sort of sound view that, adjacency can be an asset. Now, the flip side of adjacency is sometimes it's manifesting sort of a process that is sort of washing over and may serve to displace people. And so what you want to make sure is that you're making those adjacency kinds of decisions with an eye towards preservation as well as uplift, let's say.
I've got a question. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
So I'm particularly interested in the types of sales that you guys have identified here, distressed investor, et cetera. I'm not a statistician or a data person, unfortunately. So I'm curious if it's possible to build profiles of buyers as well, by whatever metric or tool was used to determine, home ownership versus rental, investor versus distressed sales, et cetera. I ask because, particularly in a follow-up to Eric's question earlier about the effects of COVID, I am very curious to see what trends happen year over year in the market and whether you see a lot of distressed sales going to investors, for example, or if there are concentrations of a particular buyer profile in particular neighborhoods as the market value changes over time. So I guess my question is twofold. Is there a way to build trends around that type of data? And if it's possible to do more than just like a single year snapshot, rather, seeing changes like this over time so that, you kind of get that flip book effect of, here's how these neighborhoods are changing year over year?
Sure. So we can't do profiles of buyers that are like, for example, 30-something Black female buyer or whatever. You
Right.
can't, the data don't support that. But what they do support is knowing that it is somebody who's buying to reside, likely, and somebody who's buying as an investment, or somebody who's buying at, auction. So you're able to sort of understand those kinds of typologies. And because we have a nice run of data, we usually try and get a couple years put together in the MVA because that provides just a little bit of stability. But I think we're probably going to have 5-6 years of data since the 5 or so years of data since the last MVA, which would allow us where, if it's possible, to sort of break that period a little bit. And I think that gets back to the first gentleman's question about that COVID period. With this run of 5 or so years, maybe we can do a little bit of not the strongest trending, but at least some look at it. I would also say, like, there may be other sources of information to know at, like, who your buyers are. Like, I've been playing around in Philadelphia trying to understand through third-party data, like individual census data. So who's coming into City of Philadelphia and what do they look like? And you can sort of do that with individual census data. And at that point, one of the things that you can discern is it's crazy. Like the pattern that I observed in Philadelphia is this meteorically fast rising incomes of home buyers in the city of Philadelphia as opposed to sort of existing homeowners. And I think that is one of the manifestations of these affordability issues that have been sort of running through several of the questions, and then the work that our friends from LISC are going to do. So it's a long answer to an important question, and I hope, when we get a chance to sort of meet all y'all sort of face to face, we can sort of engage in a little more constructive discussion. I don't know that we're going to sort of nail it 100% for you, but we will give you more, I think, than you have now.
Thank you. That's very.
I wanted to just add something back to the young lady who talked about investing in distressed communities. And we assisted the city of Detroit in doing their consolidated plan and doing a neighborhood revitalization strategy area as part of its consolidated plan. Because coming out of the bankruptcy in Detroit, the mayor wanted to address the fact that some people were leaving because they could not find funding to improve their homes, because not because of bad credit or income, but the values were underwater. They were upside down. And so he charged us with helping him to create an NRSA strategy that actually blanketed the entire city almost. You had 5 neighborhood strategy areas that covered the city almost. First time HUD had ever done that. A best practice. I don't think they have done it since. And what that helped to do was to address some of the, or use MBAs to address some of the housing issues there. It led to improvements in several neighborhoods in the area. It also led to leveraging and stimulating investments in the area, where they set up an affordable housing leverage funds that included a list of funding sources that LISC managed, that had tax credits, all the federal grants, had foundation funding, bank funding, and so on. So they had one fund that addressed affordable housing rentals, and then another fund that addressed some of the the critical infrastructure needs in those neighborhoods. And I know that the city is using an NRSA strategy, and that could be part of an answer to her question. And I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that or address that.
No, thank you for that that example, Chris. And for context of the advisory group and the public, we are absolutely looking at establishing an expanded neighborhood revitalization strategy area, one in North St. Louis and then another in South St. Louis as well.
My other question is, Ira talked about a public-private partnership as being one of the key elements for strategy moving forward. And I was wondering if there was your ability to identify the impact of opportunity zone investment in St. Louis on either the market value or as an engine to generate further regional investment.
Wow, that is an amazing question. Those opportunity zones, unfortunately, it has been our experience that when we go places, there really isn't comprehensive, reliable information about what got created with that opportunity zone designation. Now, we know what's been designated, or we know what was designated as opportunity zones, and we can certainly look at that together with the MVA and even the change in the MVA. What I would say is, without real good information about what the investments were and the size of them and the type of them and things like that, the only thing we could know is that markets that were contained within opportunity zones changed or didn't change in this way or another. That we can do. But, like I have never found, even in my own city of Philadelphia, where I feel like I have data on pretty much everything, I've never seen comprehensive data on opportunity zone investments. To me, it was one of the flaws of the construction of it, where those data never had to be reported out publicly, like investments that financial institutions make.
Any other questions before we move on? I think that we may have some members of the public participating virtually. So Tommy, do you know if we've got any questions in the chat? Yeah, if there's anyone in the chat, please, who wants to ask a question, please raise your hand. Great. Denise, we're going to bring you on to ask your question. Tony, could you please unmute Denise? All right. In the meantime, we're also almost at time. So we're going to abbreviate in order to respect everyone's time, the planning piece of this meeting. Instead, all I'll ask is for everyone in attendance, particular advisory board meetings, if you can spread the word amongst your networks about tomorrow's town hall. Again, that's really an opportunity here. We've been talking a lot about the data, about the planning process, but that's an opportunity to hear from the public about their priorities. So if you can spread the word about it, if you can attend, we would really appreciate that. And finally, we don't have time to dive into this in full, but perhaps via email, we want to also get your thoughts on focus groups. We want to do a focus group focused on housing. We want to do another focus group focused on public services. And so if you would either like to attend or if you have any suggestions for folks who we should invite to attend, please let us know either today or by email down the line. And we do have an email address dedicated to this consolidated planning process. That email address, Tommy, is cda@stlouis-mo.gov. Any final questions, either from our advisory committee or from the public about the presentations, the process, the town hall tomorrow, any of the above? Another item that I did want to discuss as a committee just briefly is we do have the survey. It's still live. When do we want to close that? End of July has been pitched. Does that sound reasonable to everyone?
When are we gonna get the updated, numbers from
The hard numbers?
Yes.
I think they should be able to, I think Lisk and Tia, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Lisk should be able to provide those raw survey response numbers within the next day.
Yes, we can.
Chris confirmed, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I know, I've sent some to some people.
Yeah.
I think it totally makes sense.
All right, yeah, we will plan to close it around the end of July. Again, if you can spread that survey amongst your networks, that would be greatly appreciated. Anything, were we able to unmute Denise?
If you haven't taken the survey, please do so.
Indeed.
And share. We need those numbers.
Can we or should we meet for the first week of August?
I think we will absolutely hold some focus groups. We're planning to hold focus groups, the week of the 15th. So again, if you have suggestions, just find us after this meeting and we'll make sure that you're invited or whoever you suggest is invited. What was Denise's question? Okay, Denise, we're sorry we're not able to hear your question right now at this moment, but you can get in touch with us at cda@stlouis-mo.gov. That's stlouis-mo.gov.
Well, can you repeat what were the ideas for the working groups?
For the focus groups?
I'm sorry, focus groups.
Yeah, we will have one focus group that's very focused on housing and affordable housing that's emerged as a top priority, both in our discussions here from the survey. It's the top priority. We see the fact that we have over 30,000 cost burden residents here in the city of St. Louis. And so that's a top priority. And so really defining what is affordable housing. It can mean so many things: for sale, rental, rent to own, new construction, rehab, permanent supportive housing, tiny homes. It can be so many things. How do we prioritize our limited resources? And that'll really be the kind of purpose of that focus group. Now I said it. Wait, no. We did call them focus group. The next one is on public services, where we have a similar challenge. We have our public services cap. We can't spend more than around $3.6 million a year on public services. It's consistently our most oversubscribed category, and it can fund so many different things. It's very flexible. It can fund food assistance, workforce development, early child care, healthcare services, reentry services, legal services, et cetera, et cetera. How do we deploy these limited resources for maximum transformative impact? So that's the discussion there. I think we may have been discussing one more. Can you remind me what that was, Dr. Rose? Or if those are the two, that's fine.
I can't remember.
All right.
Is it economic development? Where you're gonna?
Economic development was the third one, where similar challenges. Our city's economic development needs are extraordinary. Our resources are limited. How do we deploy those funds for maximum catalytic effect and to leverage and drive private investment? Great. With that, we're going to adjourn today's meeting. Thank you all so much for your time today. And
Thank
look
you.
forward to seeing many of you tomorrow at the Wool Center at 6 p.m.